Thank you, Ms. Songas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome Secretary Hagel and General Mayville. Like all Americans, and I think as you've heard in our discussion today, obviously everyone on this committee, and if you could have been on the floor throughout the past several days, I'm greatly concerned with the recent events in Iraq and Syria. We know that ISIL is a lethal terrorist organization, and we must confront the difficult questions that our president has raised about the serious threat that it poses. But this is a complex and long-term challenge, and as such, I am wary of commitments that the president has admitted will spill into future administrations, creating enduring costs while raising substantial and unpredictable risks without a more robust, clear-headed debate. And I, like Congresswoman Sanchez, would have appreciated the opportunity to have this hearing with you before we took the vote. And I appreciate the President's continued commitment not to send U.S. ground forces into combat, but his experience has shown any expansion of U.S. involvement in this region raises serious concerns over the slippery slope we may find ourselves on. Chairman Dempsey's recent testimony that he could foresee a scenario in which he could recommend U.S. ground troops in the future crystallizes the alarming uncertainties around this effort. Many questions remain. You've heard some of them addressed today, including the costs, the timetable, the nature of the participation from the region's Arab state, to name just a few. Yesterday's train and equip vote, endorsing just one piece of the strategy, focused on expanding our effort in Syria, masked the multifaceted challenges ahead, and I could not endorse it. But I appreciate the opportunity today to begin to ask some of these questions. In his September 16 testimony before the Senate, Chairman Dempsey noted that the United States and its allies would work to develop a military chain of command in Syria that is linked to a political structure. I would like to know more about the political structure that Chairman Dempsey is envisioning. Secretary Hagel, do you think that the Syrian opposition has a solid and widely supported political structure on which to base a military command? And if not, who do you think it will be linked to?
First, on the issue of a political agreement and a political resolution, I mentioned that in my testimony. The President's been very clear on that point when he has said on many occasions, and I have just noted, that there's not a military solution to this in Syria or in Iraq or in the Middle East. And so a political resolution must be achieved.
But reclaiming my time, but that is not the question. We're now embarking upon an effort to train and equip the Syrian forces that we think the moderate Syrian forces that we think we can work with. And for it to be effective, General Dempsey has said, and I believe he's correct, that it has to be tied to a political structure. So to start down this path in which we're focusing on training and equipping a force that is not aligned with any Syrian-oriented political structure really in some ways puts the cart before the horse.
Well, not exactly. If in fact there is no alternative that is allowed to develop in Syria because of the brutality of ISIL and other terrorist groups that are slaughtering the people in Syria, and you have a regime that has no legitimacy to govern, which started all this, you've got to start somewhere. And we recognize this is difficult. We recognize there's no good option here. But if we don't help where we can help develop some infrastructure, and this is why we would train in units, not individuals, to allow a political opposition to come together based on security, because security is required in this as well. It isn't either or. That's how we envision, and that's how we would want to go forward. That's partly why this is a long-term effort. This is why we have been very clear. It's complicated. It's serious. But if there's no opening, no opportunity for a political opposition group to develop, because they're all out of the country.
But you would agree it obviously doesn't exist today.
There is very little organizational opposition in Syria today. That's right. And that's part of the problem.
Thank you. My time is up. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. This morning, I saw a brief news story that said that decisions for approving targets for airstrikes in Syria would be made by the President and only by the President. Is that true?
No, it's not true. That story in the Wall Street Journal was not true.
I can't tell you how relieved I am to hear that. I think that's a terrible mistake if we're going to start making daily tactical decisions in the White House. So I am very relieved to hear that, but that leads
I might just say I was sitting next to the President yesterday when this entire issue was being discussed, and he was very clear with General Austin. Once he makes decisions, he gives General Austin and our military leaders the authority to carry out those policies.
Outstanding. As I said, I'm very, very relieved to hear that. That does lead me to the larger question, though. Could you, you know, I've got 3 or 4 minutes here, but could one of you sort of outline what the command structure, what the command and control structure is going to be this? What is the role of General Austin and CENTCOM? What is the role of Iraqi commanders, of Peshmerga? How is that, who is going to make the decisions?
Well, because the General is just a pretty face here and hasn't had to answer a question really except one.
Actually, I was so hoping he would answer. So.
Well, you've never been indirect before, Congressman. So with your permission, I'll ask
Very good.
General Mayville.
The command and control structure begins with the government of Iraq and the Iraqi security forces. Our role there is to supplement that with what they need so that they can make informed decisions. We're doing that right now. Now, we're going to switch out some of the initial assessment teams and replace them with Army advisors that can better help at the general officer level, as well as reach into the ministries and assist as well. But the chain of command is an Iraqi chain of command enabled by partners in the region.
Okay, pretty faced or not, let me try it this way. I started my questioning by asking about targets for airstrikes in Syria. So if it's not the President of the United States, who is it?
Now for targeting will be planned jointly and enabled by U.S. Central Command through its CAOC, which is in the region. The mechanisms to command and control those, they're already in place. We did that. You saw that unfurl when we retook Mosul Dam. You saw that when we assisted in the operations around Haditha and Emerly. So we're not going to change that. The CAOC, which is a Air Force command and control structure, a component underneath Central Command, will orchestrate all of this. The coordination and the planning, it'll be done forward in concert with Iraqi forces and Iraqi leaders.
Airstrikes in Syria, I'm talking about.
We haven't received authorization. That's part of what the Secretary was talking about. We have yet to receive authorization for those missions. But
oh, it's not the President of the United States, but we're not really quite sure who is going to make those decisions.
But if I could, sir, whether we strike where we strike ISIL, regardless of its geography, the command and control structure that I just laid out is the command and control structure that we'll use wherever the President allows us to strike.
All right, I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Hanabusa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary and General, for being here. I think part of the problem, and you heard it as with the questionings that we're having today, is that because the amendment that we voted on involved Syria and the potential to train and to arm the Syrian, quote, whatever that moderate force will be that's going to be vetted 15 days from now, or when the Senate passes it, and the fact that the 170 airstrikes are really in Iraq, and we're talking about our 1,600 that, as far as I know, are in Iraq, that the public, I think, are getting confused, as we probably are, as to what exactly is being done in Iraq versus what we're authorizing. You also know that part of the continuing resolution was to fund OCO at the 2014 level, which technically is about 30 some odd billion dollars more than what was requested in 2015. And whether or how you determine what that money is and how it plays out for the remainder of the continuing resolution is something else. But we also know that it was the request early on that the OCO funding include the $500 million, which is to arm and train 5,000 Syrians. So having said that, whoever can answer this question, take it. My question is really, when we divide the two, not the Syria part, but the Iraq part, which we are clearly engaged in, one, where is the funding coming from? Is it OCO funding? Two, how much is that costing us per day? And though we feel that we don't have the same kind of legislation as we have in the amendment, which clearly defined who would be appropriate vetted people in Syria. Now, who are the people that we're vetting, if we're vetting them at all, in Iraq? Because right now, airstrikes are in Iraq, and we need the ground forces, as I understand the philosophy, to be in Iraq. So who are we vetting? Because General Dempsey, I think, made a statement yesterday that there are 50 brigades or so in Iraq, of which 26 or 24, one of those two numbers, are not appropriate because it's not of the right composition. So who's making these vetting decisions, and what are we in for in the Iraq portion of this, though we've sort of been kind of thrown off the path because we've been talking about Syria. But our people, 1,600 of them, are in Iraq. I think my constituents want to know, what does this mean for Iraq? Iraq is the concern right now because that's where we are. So whoever wants to take it.
I'll give you an answer, and then the general may want to go deeper on this. But your question about who are we vetting? We would be vetting the Syrian opposition forces that we would begin to train and assist.
But I'm talking about Iraq. So
But you asked the question about who we're vetting. That's who we're vetting. It's not Iraq.
so we're not vetting anyone in Iraq? Is that?
The Iraqi security forces under the government, the sovereign government of Iraq, and the Peshmerga, who are, as you know, are part of the overall structure, are in place. They're institutionalized. They are functioning armies now. That's different from what we're doing.
Not to interrupt you, but General Dempsey said of the 50 brigades, only 24
Those are in
or
Iraq.
26. No, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Iraq. I said we've sort of messed this whole thing together, but I'm looking at Iraq. So are we vetting the Iraqi forces that are supposed to be the ground troops?
No.
Or is it only Iraq that it's going to provide? The general's nodding, and you're saying no. So I would like, let me
I'm
hear
nodding
from the
because I
general.
understand the question. I can understand it.
We're not vetting Iraqi forces and troops. What General Dempsey was talking about is the most capable Iraqi security forces. The vetting in that part of it is part of the Syrian train and equip moderate Syrian opposition. General, you want to add anything to that?
Yes, Congresswoman, I understand the question. I can see how it can be confusing. What we are doing today in Iraq is we are first and foremost securing U.S. government facilities and U.S. government personnel, American citizens in Iraq. We have two operating centers, one in Erbil and one in Baghdad, designed to facilitate the Iraqi security forces operations. We advise them. We make them aware of what they need to do next, and we help them track issues. And as was mentioned earlier, when they go on an operation and it needs to be enabled by air support, these operation centers do that as well. Most recently, the assessment team that went into Baghdad area, the area that General Dempsey spoke to, and identified 50 brigades and gave an assessment. That assessment is over, and we are changing those forces out, and they will be advise and assist forces to work with selected brigades and divisions in Iraq. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes for questions. And Secretary Hagel, I first want to thank you for yesterday's Medal of Honor ceremony for Benny Adkins. That was very special, and I appreciate you doing that for that great American. I understand that the administration was prepared to acknowledge publicly that the Russians were in violation of the INF Treaty over a year ago, but didn't for policy reasons. Do you know what thought went into why we didn't publicly acknowledge the INF violations earlier?
I know that we were carefully examining the evidence that we had and that we were looking at to see if, in fact, they were in violation. But as to your specific question, no, I don't know.
Okay. Yesterday, or not recently, Russia's president announced at Yalta in mid-August that he had authorized the deployment of Russian tactical nuclear weapons into Ukrainian territory. Do you know how the U.S. would respond and what the implications are for us if he, in fact, does move those weapons into Ukrainian territory?
Well, again, I think rather than talking about this in an open hearing, we'd probably ought to do this in a closed hearing to take you through a number of steps there on this. And I think I'd feel more comfortable to talk about it that way.
I understand. And do you know why the United States is considering continuing to approve Russia's proposals to fly under the Open Skies Treaty, enhance sensors and aircraft over the United States while it's in material breach of the INF? I'm real concerned about us going forward with that Open Skies access when we know that they're cheating on Chemical Weapons Convention, the Biological Weapons Convention, and now we know they're cheating on the INF. What are your thoughts on whether we should go forward with the Open Skies practice?
We, as you know, just had a team in Moscow last week on this specific issue. We were represented by a senior member, Defense Department, State Department led it, others. And these were all issues that were discussed. We, the Russians and us, have many mutual interests on different things. And what they have done in Ukraine and their actions the last 6 months have not only complicated but put in jeopardy all of those interests that we have. So we are working our way through the very set of questions that you've just asked.
So
right
in
now.
fact, this may be one of the consequences they may suffer or experience as a result of the INF violations.
Well, we're
denied access under the Open Skies program.
no decision has been made on this, but we're looking at a lot of different options, and we're talking to the Russians.
Good. My last question is, recently or yesterday, the committee received the second of two reprogramming requests to the total of $1 billion out of the Army O&M to pay for the military's efforts to respond to the Ebola outbreak. We already have a serious readiness problem. What are your thoughts about what this $1 billion would do to that? And that's just for either one of you. It doesn't matter.
Well, thank you. On two pieces to that. One is the money, and second is probably the bigger implication of your question. How does that affect, as you say, our readiness and our capability to respond to other challenges? And we've got a lot of them, as you know. On the money, that can be done okay by using OCO. That would not affect our readiness in any other area. But the other question you ask is a legitimate question. Right now, General Dempsey and our commanders have agreed that what we will be providing, the military, in assisting in Africa with the specific areas that the President announced on using our unique capabilities would not affect our readiness anywhere in the world, because these are capabilities that we have that we wouldn't take away from any of the other areas that we are now dealing with that are significant threats.
So am I hearing, since you said that OCO is really the proper source for the money, would it be accurate to say that we can expect you to come to the conferees and ask us to adjust the OCO levels to reflect this added amount of money before we finish up the NDAA?
Well, I'd have to talk to the comptroller about this and OMB and on the bookkeeping on how that works. But as you know, Congressman, and there are a lot of different opinions on whether there should be an overseas account or not, and whether it's a slush fund or not. But in this case, I think, and it's an imperfect process, probably OCO is an appropriate account for this kind of thing, these things that develop, these contingencies, overseas contingency situations. I don't think anybody would have forecast this. We didn't a year ago, the seriousness of this. So we're working it right now with comptrollers and the appropriations people here on the Hill.
Based on the way the world's looking, OCO may have to get a lot bigger to accommodate all the contingencies that are popping up around the globe.
Well, it may. I hope not. But as you know, we've been bringing that OCO account down every year. So that's the good news.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your service. Who's next? Mr. Barber from Arizona is recognized for 5 minutes for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and General Mayville for your service, both in uniform, Mr. Secretary, and in public life as a senator and now as our Secretary of Defense. You know, I took the vote yesterday after a lot of consideration about what we were doing when we were giving authorization to a limited authority to train and equip the vetted and moderate forces in Syria. I was proud to stand with my colleagues to give that to you and to the President, because absolutely we must stop the savagery that we know has been already committed at the hands of ISIL, and also because I want to make sure that we do everything we can to prevent them from having a safe haven to send harm our way in the homeland. We must do everything we can to prevent another situation in which terrorists can attack this country from safe havens overseas. So I have two questions, Mr. Secretary, one related to that and the other to the larger issue of how we really contain and hopefully eliminate and destroy ISIL. First, could you speak to the question about how you see ISIL's current capabilities for carrying out transnational terrorism? And secondly, could you speak to how arming the Syrian opposition will roll back ISIL's territory and their ability to launch an attack, and how long would you estimate it will take for the opposition to really engage ISIL in order to degrade its capabilities?
Thank you, Congressman. The first question on transnational criminal activities as a source of ISIL funding, it is part of, and a significant part of that funding, and I think in a couple of the questions that were asked here earlier, specifically the black marketing of oil.
Secretary, I was really addressing how, what's your view about how we can prevent their capabilities for exporting terrorism to our country and to other countries?
Well, you have to cut that capability. You have to cut off the funding. Right. And that's what I was talking about earlier, and answer some other questions as well. And that is a huge priority of what we're overall, in our overall strategy, how you defeat ISIL, how you degrade them, you disconnect them, and you defeat them. Taking that funding away is a big part of that, and we are operationally doing that right now with our partners through the Treasury Department, our law enforcement all over the world. And it's a key part of degrading any capacity they have in the future. As to your longer-term question, how long, I think the President has been pretty clear on this. When General Dempsey and I were before the Senate committee 2 days ago, we talked about this. I can't give you an exact number of years, how long, but we know it's going to take some time. We know it is going to take some years. Maybe we can do it sooner. But this is, as you know so well, and has been reflected this morning in many of the comments, this is a group that has capacity that we've never seen before outside of a nation state. And you mix in with that the religious dynamic, ethnic dynamic, all the other factors that complicate this situation. It's going to take some time, and we know that.
In your view, is ISIL capable today of sending radicalized Americans back to this country to do harm to the United States?
Oh, I think they're capable of doing that today.
Given that, I want to expand the question of their threat in the Middle East, to Israel, to Jordan, to Lebanon. Can you speak to us about what you see as already happening and further threats that might exist for those countries?
It is very clear to me, and I think most people who have looked at this, and certainly it is to the President and his administration, that with the instability that currently resides all across the Middle East, and you go right through each of the countries, starting on the west with Lebanon, and you move east. Every one of those countries is in some form of instability and under threat from ISIL, from other terrorist organizations. If we see further destabilization of these countries, that will create a global problem that will ripple out everywhere. Oil. If you would destabilize the major oil-producing companies or countries in the Middle East, that in itself would affect world economy, would affect everything. Israel. I mean, you look at where we are today in that part of the world. It is probably as unstable as it's been in our lifetime.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Lamborn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here.
Yes, sir.
I did support the amendment yesterday of the chairman, and however, that's only good through December 11th at the latest, so we will be revisiting this issue again soon. So because we know ISIL is so dangerous, look what the news is out of Australia just today, going against the public, Australians. So this is a bloodthirsty group, and the beheading of 2 Americans is a horrible situation and was one of the real reasons why I supported the President's plan. However, I'd like to have you elaborate on some of the details of the President's plan. Other questions have done this previously, but particularly, are we contemplating, will we be using UAVs and drones, armed predators and reapers to take out ISIL leadership like we've done in Iraq and Afghanistan, like we are doing now currently in Somalia and Yemen?
Well, the way I would answer your question is, and I think the President noted this in his statement to the American people a week ago, that we are looking at every option, every target, using our capabilities and our partners to degrade and destroy ISIL.
So that is something that is on the table?
Everything is being closely examined.
Because I would certainly hope the President would not take that off the table.
Everything is on the table.
Okay, good. And regardless of whether it's Syria, Iraq, or any other neighboring country, this leadership needs to be, and the American people would support eliminating the leadership.
Well, as you also recall from the President's speech, he said wherever they are.
Okay. Okay. Second issue is the use of our Tier 1 special forces, our elite special forces, to mount assaults on the ground to capture and apprehend ISIL leadership wherever they are found. This is what I meant when I said we were doing this in Somalia and Yemen. Is that something that will be contemplated and is on the table?
Well, I think to really get into any of the specific tactics, Congressman, we want to probably have a closed briefing on that. We can do that.
Okay. Okay, certainly. Then let's follow up on that.
We can do it.
At the appropriate time. And also along that same lines, using boots on the ground, for lack of a better word, to guide and direct close air support. That is something that I think is critical also. And once again, is that something that we can talk about in this forum? I want to see as many tools in the toolbox as necessary so that this plan can be successful. And I think taking things off the table militates against that.
Well, again, within the confines of an open hearing, I would again say that we're looking at everything, nothing off the table, but I would also point to the success here recently regarding the Haditha Dam, Mosul Dam, and some of these strikes where it has been the Iraqi security forces on the ground with their special forces and our airstrikes, and we didn't have our people embedded with them, and they were very successful. So the Iraqi security forces have capability.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear your answers, Mr. Secretary. My concern is, I'm just going to echo what the chairman said earlier. Sometimes the president takes things off the table right off the bat, and that's troubling to me. I want to see as many options on the table as possible.
Well, if I might, and I think you've got a little time, so I won't indulge anyone else here. I know how that works. I don't think it was a matter, and I know it's not a matter of the president taking options off the table of the American public. I think what he wants to always make sure that the American public is certain and clear of what his intent is and what he, as the president of this country, is willing to do, but he wants the American people to understand what is it that he's getting them into. What is he asking the American people for? And I think that's the clarity you see. Tactically in these issues, no, he won't take things off the table.
Thank you for that reassurance, and I will continue to be supportive. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
At this time, we're going to go to 4 minutes so that we can try to get everybody's questions in before we have to go to votes. Ms. Duckworth?
Had to start with me, didn't you, Mr. Chairman? Thank you. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being patient and staying here until we freshmen get to ask questions. I very much appreciate that.
Congresswoman, I was a freshman once. I understand. You asked the best questions.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. So, you know, I voted no yesterday, and it was a tough no vote for me because I simply have a lot of questions. If the vote yesterday was on this reauthorization for the $500 million that expires in just 12 weeks. Why would we not start by asking for that amount of money to arm the Peshmerga and putting more forces and more resources behind the troops in Iraq first before we go to what is a short-term funding for arming these rebel groups in Syria?
Two answers, Congresswoman. One is we've got to do both. And we are presently supporting the Peshmerga as well as the Iraqi security forces with literally expanded, accelerated help, equipment, armaments, and we're doing that and have been doing that, and I noted that in an earlier answer. So it's not an either or. We believe we need to do both, and we need to get the training and equip part of the moderate Syrian opposition piece started as quickly as possible because they both fit into the overall strategy as how you defeat ISIL and you help stabilize those countries, particularly Iraq. Right. And so it's not a matter of not doing one versus the other.
I am concerned that we're starting with the rebels. General, I had a couple questions for you. If we actually train and equip these moderate rebel groups and we send them back in, my understanding is that they don't have much of a command and control structure. They are fairly self-identifying. There's a whole bunch of groups. There's no, military-like structure like the ISIS and ISIL has. And their first mission is to basically defend and deny territory to ISIS. How are they able to logistically support themselves once we train them and give them this weaponry? How are they going to be able to conduct these operations? Who's going to provide them with the 5.56, the 40 mic, the 7.62? Where is that coming from? And are we looking now at relying on contractors or secret ops or covert ops to do that?
Congresswoman, we are looking at all options. How do you sustain this effort once we begin? But you do raise an important issue in developing the leadership and finding those within these initial formations that have the aptitude for additional skills. So we're going to have to find who has the aptitude to be a logistician, who has the aptitude to be a communications expert, and we'll build that capability as we build this basic force. The first phase is identify them, vet them, create a relationship, give them the basic training, and let them go back and protect their communities. The next thing we'll do is we'll build off of that with skills, and we will stay connected to them. There'll have to be an oversight, there'll have to be accountability, and we'll have to create a method for doing that with the leadership that we identified within the training.
Okay. Just in the last 20 seconds I have, so you're not ruling out the fact that we may be actually turning to a Blackwater or whatever their subsidiary is, Z, International Development Solutions Academy, whatever they're calling themselves, to provide the logistical support in the initial stages? Is that what we're opening ourselves up to?
There has been, we're still in the very early planning of this, but to date, there has been no discussions of anything other than how we as a military would do this.
Okay, thank you.
Ladies, time has expired. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. And Mr. Secretary, I think I heard you clearly and concisely say we are at war and everything is on the table. Is that accurate?
Yes.
I think one of the things that is confusing to me, and I think confusing the majority of Americans, is that that's not consistent with what the President says when he, as one of my colleagues pointed out, takes other actions or potential operations off the table. And my granddad's no longer here, but he was a World War II POW and a B-17 pilot, and he would tell you that the first decision is the decision to win, and make sure that we're willing to do whatever it takes to win. Desert Storm was in 1990. We've been in that country, in those countries, on and off for 24 years, over half of my life. We've spent trillions of dollars. We've had hundreds of thousands of Americans in there, hundreds of thousands of other people that we have trained. And General, these 5,000 moderate Syrians ought to be pretty easy to find. I assume they're 10 foot tall and bulletproof. My question is how can 5,000 moderate Syrians do what the United States and all of our coalitions could not do in 24 years?
Well, 5,000 moderate opposition groups with basic training to secure their villages will have some effect, but it won't have the decisive effect that you speak to. But it's only one part of a larger effort. That larger effort includes training, continuing to assist in the Iraqi security forces counter ISIL. We'll have the use of our air power to assist where it's necessary. And we're also looking to employ the direct support of partners in the region. So we're going to squeeze on this through multiple venues.
Then with due respect, the President should outline that there should be a separate vote, not a vote on a continuing resolution. I blame this on my leadership as much as I do the President. This is much more serious than an amendment to a continuing resolution. I would also suggest, you know, the Sunnis and the Shias have been fighting since the 7th century. We don't understand that war. Certainly not all of them participate in it. But when we talk about beheadings, you know, Mr. Secretary, it's my understanding that the Saudis beheaded 8 people in the month of August, and they practice one of the strictest forms of Sharia law and do some things over there that, by any stretch of the imagination, I think any American would consider barbaric. And so how do we pick our friends?
Well, I think the first way I'd answer your question is America, I think any country, always responds in its own self-interest. What is our interest here? When I think you asked the question, when American citizens are publicly killed, murdered, is that an interest of this country? Well, I think it is. Is it a threat to who we are? I think it is. So you can take that out as far as you want. So that's partly, I think, the answer. But to your bigger question, which is exactly the right question, the history of that area. We can't interject ourselves or impose ourselves on any country or traditions or history. And what we're doing differently is bringing in partners from the region. This, as the President said, what I said, has to be settled by the countries themselves. And that means the Arab countries, the Muslim countries. We can help, but we can't alone dictate or determine the outcome of that. But it's in our interest.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Maffei.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, Lieutenant General Mayville, thank you for your service to our country. Can you describe to us what, there's talk about coalition. What are the members of the coalition that actually are going to have people on the ground, either as military advisors or troops along with us?
As I said in my opening testimony, we are close to 50 coalition nations who are
Mr. Secretary, I don't mean to interrupt you, but specifically have committed to having people there arm in arm with us, not just supplies, but actual human beings on the ground helping us with that mission.
Each country will provide assistance based on their capacities too. Some will be air power, some will be people. We've had a number of military offers. We're coordinating that now. I noted in my testimony that General Allen has the essential responsibility of bringing that together, coordinating each of these pieces. So we're in the process of doing that.
Okay, thank you. I'm a little bit still confused about the nature of this. The President promises no combat mission, and I know you've been questioned by other folks about sort of what that means. But I am concerned that whether our people are over there on a combat mission, a training mission, advisory mission, they will become targets. Can you just clarify, if we have people that are shot at, they will have the rules of engagement will say they should defend themselves, correct, sir?
Oh, absolutely.
So I appreciate that, and I'm glad. But won't that then lead to combat missions? Maybe not offensive combat missions, but if our people are in harm's way, won't they be in combat?
Well, anybody in a war zone who's ever been in a war zone, and some of you have, know that if you're in a war zone, you're in combat. What the President has said, that there would be no specific American ground combat role. I think that's pretty clear. Yes, if you have advisors in a war, they're in a combat zone. Yes, but the role of Americans in that war, as the President has laid out, I think is pretty clear what he said we will do and what we won't do.
Can you or the Lieutenant General give us any sense how many Americans will be put in how many Americans additionally will be put in harm's way, either in the theater or near the theater?
Well, what I said in regard to the President's announcement last week on what he's ordered now additional American forces into Iraq, by the time they all get there, there'd be around 1,600 American forces in Iraq.
And they would be in Iraq?
In Iraq.
Not Syria?
Not Syria, in Iraq.
Okay. And then just finally, I guess, trying to figure out, again, who exactly we're helping. You speak of sort of the we in this, and I know you've been asked similar questions, but I'm still fuzzy on how exactly you're going to identify the forces that we can train, we can enhance, and I guess it goes back to my allies' question. And are they going to be alone? Is this just going to be a few Syrian fighters, 5,000 each? Because it seems to me that if we're training them, yes, we will eventually build up a force there. But in the meantime, won't our enemy build up their force far more than we can catch up?
Well, a couple of answers to your question. It's a beginning. We might be able to do more than 5,000 a year. As I said in my statement, it depends on more training sites, more vetting, more people. We're going to train them in units, equip them in units, not just rebels here and there, so that they're prepared to take on more and more responsibility. With our partners, that's another piece of this. This is an undertaking that's pretty dramatic and sophisticated. It's a beginning, but at the same time, all of the other dynamics of this strategy, what's going on, as General Mayville just noted here a minute ago, are in play at the same time. We're not just relying on that train and equip moderate Syrian.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Nugent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Hagel and General Mayville. I really want to thank you for your service across the board, and it's been varied for Secretary Hagel in a number of ways, going back to Vietnam. We really do appreciate that. You made a comment about combat, so I want to make sure that our troops that are, the 1,600 that are in Iraq, are going to be compensated as they should be referenced to combat pay, because they're going to be exposed to that at some point in time, or could be. Are they going to be?
Yes, they are now, but let me have General Mayville explain how that's.
Okay, so those currently in country are receiving combat pay?
Let me not get in front of that important decision that will come to the Secretary, but typically you're talking about hostile duty pay.
Yes.
And there are a set of procedures that's clearly outlined and under what conditions one is entitled to that.
Okay.
And we will apply that standard here, and it will go to the Secretary for decision.
So the answer is the Secretary will make that decision whether or not.
Yes, and they will be compensated.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. You know, I voted no. I will tell you it was difficult, but at the same time, because all the briefings I've heard, and you've touched on it, you know, the Syrian force that we're talking about training and equipping, the reason I voted no was, you know, they have very little organization. There's no, and you mentioned this, there's no political structure in place to support them. I would support an Iraqi issue because there is a political force to at least start talking about how to fix things. Command and control. Well, we know that at this point in time there is no command and control for the Syrian Free Forces or whatever you want to call them. And there is for the Iraqis because we helped build that. And training or retraining the Iraqi force is a whole lot easier than trying to train up by the president's own, you know, description of, you know, guys that are, you know, the regular folks. They may have some combat experience now because they had to fight for their lives, but they're certainly not a trained combat just as Iraq is because we train them, even though they've had some issues, but we still have at least a base to start from. And I guess that's where I disagreed with us getting involved in the train and equip portion in Syria when we have the ability to do that, I think, and win in Iraq. I think we have. I think we've shown that we can work with them. So it gets a lot, that's a whole lot of hoping and wishing in the fact that, and I know it depends upon the training facilities that we have available, but the testimony's been, you know, 3 training facilities, 5,000 troops. I don't know how do we overcome those other things, the command and control, political system, and the actual trained forces, because it's not going to remain static, obviously, in Syria as we move forward. If you could.
Yeah. Well, here, the way I would explain it, and it is my opinion and the opinion of the President, that if you are going to defeat ISIL, and that's the objective, as the President's laid out, you're not going to defeat ISIL just in Iraq. Matter of fact, most of the ISIL threat is in Syria, safe havens, training camps, resources. So you're going to have to deal with them in
But
Syria.
I would think a step-by-step, at least an approach where you can drive them out of Iraq, where we have the opportunity to, and as we're doing that, focus then back on Syria. Now I yield back. I apologize.
We think we have to do both at the same time.
I appreciate that.
Mr. Kilmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for joining us. I'm of the opinion that the 2001 authorization for the use of military force needs to be rescinded, and that a more specific authorization needs to be drafted to combat the ISIL threat. What cautions, what advice and requests would you have for us if we were to consider that effort of drafting a new authorization for the use of military force?
Well, as you know, we believe the President has the authority under the AUMF of 2001 to do what he believes that is important to do for the security of this country. He also has said he welcomes the President's or the Congress's involvement, support, if the Congress believes that they want to get involved in writing a new authorization of force, that's the prerogative of the Congress. But to go beyond that is to advise you. I'm not a lawyer, so I'd leave that up to the lawyers, and specifically what the White House thinks they would need if that's something that they think they should want to do or need to do.
Is there anything specific that you would want or not want in such an authorization? Understanding that you believe you currently have the authorization, I guess the question I have, in one of the briefings we had, it was said we would welcome if Congress wanted to provide a more specific authorization. Any constraints or things that you would want to see in that regard?
Well, I think any time, and I'm going to be general in this because that's not my area. That's really the president have to make those kinds of decisions. But for us, Department of Defense, who we are always the ones required to implement, we would want to have the Commander-in-Chief have as much flexibility within the bounds of accountability, which in a co-equal branch of government we have to have. We recognize that. But for us, we have to have that flexibility, and I think the Commander-in-Chief does as well in order to carry out his duties.
The other question I had for you was, has the department begun to consider the second and third order effects of providing air support and training and supplies as prescribed by this mission? And I'm particularly concerned with the wear and tear on our military airplanes and seagoing vessels that may have a higher utilization rate than, and as a consequence require more maintenance than was originally presumed in the President's FY15 budget submission. As the presumed $500 million OCO dollars to train and equip our allies won't cover that initial maintenance, where will the additional money come from, OCO or O&M accounts or through a supplemental request?
We're looking at all that right now, and you're right. As we pick up the pace on this mission and do the things that we need to do, we're going to most likely have to change some of those numbers. But that's not new. I mean, the world is dangerous and it's fluid and it's dynamic. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
I think at this time I will take my 4 minutes here, and I appreciate you both being here. You know, as we look back on things, I remember Vice President Biden saying the victory in Iraq will be one of the greatest successes of the Obama administration. And as I look out and I see those of you with your combat patches, I would say that the success goes to those that were in the field. But that being said, we did succeed, and we succeeded with combat troops and using all of our assets, and it was a gift to Iraq that unfortunately has fallen apart. My concern is when we start talking about counterterrorism operations as opposed to full combat, I have some concerns there. ISIL, to me, is somewhat of a state, not a recognized state, but they actually have territory, they have wealth, and they have an army, and they're different than the typical terrorist effort. And I understand our desire to want to use the Kurds and the Iraqi army and the Syrian forces that we're talking about. My concerns stem from a question you got earlier about who's got the central command here. I mean, who's really calling the shots when you're putting these pieces together? And I have the concern with that, but also in another hearing I had asked, is the Iraqi army or the Peshmerga willing and authorized to move into Syria if that's what it takes to destroy this enemy ultimately, especially if our effort with the Syrians is not successful? And the answer I got was no. And to me, that's like saying in World War II, well, we'll go to Germany, but we won't go in and defeat them. And so what is our contingency here? What are we going to do if this effort in Syria is not successful, knowing that our strongest assets on the ground are not willing to go into Syria where they have safe haven at this point?
First, I think we recognize that Iraq is a sovereign country, so we don't order Iraq to do anything we can't.
Understood.
If Iraq makes a decision for whatever reason and to take whatever action, that's their decision.
That to me is their objective, okay, is to liberate Iraq from this enemy, from ISIL, but our objective is to destroy ISIL. So I'm concerned about the strength of what we have in Syria.
Well-
We may run them into Syria, and then what if we're not succeeding there?
Well, that's exactly right, that we're looking at this from a borderless dynamic, that ISIL is a threat to all the nations of the Middle East. Right now, they're principally focused in their safe havens in Syria, which is ungovernable, and as you know, in the eastern part of Syria. So with the strategy that we have laid out and we're implementing with partners again, essential, strong, united, inclusive Iraqi government, essential. We've got that must-have Muslim Arab partners, essential, as well as other partners in order to destroy ISIL. And you're exactly right, it isn't by borders. We are not dealing with that. Each will play roles where they can.
Well, my time is running out, but I would hope maybe in another setting, a classified setting, perhaps we can find out what some of those contingencies might be, because I know the good general has already anticipated some of these things as a strategist, and it's not necessarily something we want to expose to everyone. So,
thank you.
I appreciate that, and I yield back my time. At this time, they have called votes, and so we are going to break, and I've been told we are going to return after the votes. And I, again, appreciate both of you for your time today.
Yeah, and encourage members to come.
And I do encourage members to come back, even some of those that are left, and get them back. Thank you.